The Pig War only lasted 4 months. Yet it had a greater impact on the world than wars lasting 40 years. It was a war without violence that prevented grave violence. But despite its pacificity, it did not come without its fair share of turmoil, too. Since 1818, the San Juan Islands of present-day Washington had been sought after by both the United States and the United Kingdom due to its highly arable farmland. Upon their first discovery, both nations had been willing to share the archipelago within such proximity of their respective borders. Sheep pastures dotted the landscape. Trading posts between the Washington and Canadian territories were established, and even the Hudson Bay Company built farms from which to manage the fur industry. However, this peace could not last forever. Conflict soon arose from this friendly, yet unofficial, agreement. In the 1830s and 40s, the overall Northwestern Territory came under scrutiny by U.S. settlers migrating to the West. This interest was politically legitimized by the 54-40 or fight campaign of President Polk's 1844 election, restoring confidence in American citizens' belief of manifest destiny, that the United States was destined to extend her reach to the Pacific and farther north into Canadian soil. To quell this aggressive advancement, the 1846 Treaty of Oregon was signed between the British and Americans. Crafted in London, the two parties agreed on a territory line drawn by the 49th parallel, extending south through the middle of the Channel, and later to the Pacific Ocean. The glaring error with this treaty was the existence of two different channels, the Haro to the west, and the Rosario to the east. The United States honored the Haro trait, giving them control of the islands, the United Kingdom, the Rosario. When U.S. citizens moved to San Juan, the British were furious, calling them squatters and trespassers. Tensions between the two grew by day. The U.S. citizens pleaded with the mainland for military protection, while the British sought methods by which to remove the Americans. June 15th, 1859. That Wednesday morning, Lyman Cutler, a failed gold prospector from Kentucky, noticed what appeared to be a wild pig rooting his potato garden. Incensed, he shot and killed it. Unbeknown to him, it was actually a domesticated pig owned by Charles Griffin, a Hudson Bay Company agent. When Cutler apologized and offered $10 for the pig, Griffin demanded $100. The argument became heated, with both men leaving in anger. The British, looking for examples of poor American conduct, seized the opportunity and threatened a forcible eviction of Cutler and his countrymen. The Americans responded by pleading to the Department of Oregon for military protection, who in turn sent the 64 soldiers of the Army's 9th Infantry Regiment, led by a 34-year-old Army captain named George Pickett. Less than a day after his arrival, the British responded with the HMS Satellite, the HMS Tribune, and the HMS Plumper, with a comparably sized force of Royal Marines. When ordered to leave by the British, however, Pickett refused. Reinforcements would continue to be sent by both nations for the ensuing months, as the two parties watched each other from across the water. The American forces had reached their maximum strength of 461 men. The British, with over 2,000 Royal Marines and 167 cannons, set up camp in the north. They had begun military drills with their artillery, firing upon the nearby bluffs of Griffin Bay. An attempt at a parley was made by Pickett and his men. It was an exercise in futility. The only possible solution for the British was the complete and immediate removal of all Americans on the land. When word of the conflict reached Washington, D.C., President James Buchanan was furious that such an insignificant squabble over a pig could reach such huge proportions. He dispatched General Winfield Scott, the acting U.S. Army commander and veteran of the War of 1812, to investigate the problem, ease hostilities between both sides, and determine a possible solution. Upon his arrival to the islands 6 weeks later, he was surprised at the state of the war between the two forces. The officers of both militaries were attending church services together aboard the Satellite. Canadian tourists had arrived from Newfoundland to spectate the opposing forces. The only apparent threat to the armies was the excessive whiskey they shared every night. With these newfound amiable relations, it was simple for Scott to fashion a working compromise. Joint military occupation was agreed upon, with forces limited to 1 company of men per country. The Royal Marine Company remained stationed to the north, whereas the U.S. Army's company established a permanent base to the south. Relations remained this way for 12 years, until the 1872 Treaty of Washington provided that the Royal Marines leave the San Juan Islands to U.S. control. They would then be annexed into the state of Washington.